Welcome to Your Idaho, brought to you by the Gem State Patriot. My name is Bob Nugebauer, and we're privileged today to have a very prominent guest from John Birch Society, CEO, Art Thompson. Nice to have you here in Idaho, Art.
My pleasure.
I know you're here to give a talk this evening about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Could you tell people what this whole partnership is about and what's been going on through the Congress and out with our legislators?
Surely. Actually, the whole gist of the matter is the name, partnerships. For the first time, we are actually getting in bed with other countries in a manner that goes well beyond trade. We are not opposed to trade or free trade. But when you see the term partnership in any agreement, that should ring a bell. Because what they are really trying to do is to integrate our economy with these other countries. I will be conservative by saying that almost all, I believe it's all, but almost all of the literature and emails and pronouncements and speeches and press conferences coming out of the White House talking about these partnerships, the term economic integration is in there. The think tanks that are supporting these things, it likewise is there. Economic integration. Economic integration is not trade, it's dependency. They're trying to create a condition where we are tied up in this big economic package around the world called globalism, to where we cannot be independent as an American people. We can't be independent as an American businessman or anything else. It is a move toward a one-world government, packaged as free trade. Now, you know, we've all had the experience of buying a product where the advertising, the package, and everything told us one thing. We got it home, started to use it, and found out, well, it doesn't quite live up to the advertising. And it's the same way with politicians. I don't think anybody out there has ever voted for a politician that didn't get what they wanted, right?
Well, they usually get what they deserve.
Well, yeah, but the rhetoric of a candidate, he tells you what he knows you want to hear.
Correct.
Just like any marketing guy does with a product. And it's the same with these free trade agreements, these free trade partnerships. They're telling people what they want to hear instead of actually looking at the package to see what's in it. Now, the problem with looking at the package to see what's in it is we can't. These negotiations are all done in secret. Not even the Congress can find out what's in them, and yet the Constitution of the United States mandates. It doesn't say you shoulda, oughta, coulda. It says that Congress shall regulate commerce.
Well, don't you need a two-thirds vote in the Senate to get a treaty like this passed? And I understand they're trying to do this on a fast track.
Well, they are, but here again, because Congress, under the Constitution, has to regulate commerce, the House of Representatives will vote on it as well. Now, they don't call it a treaty, but it will be implemented as a treaty. But both houses of Congress must vote on any commercial treaty. That's because of the mandate under the Constitution that they regulate commerce, the whole Congress.
But there's something different about this one. They're trying to fast track this and give the president the power to do this. Is that correct?
That's correct. Now, let me explain that fast track a little bit for your viewers here. Fast track authority basically says that the executive, the president, may negotiate a trade agreement. Now, because it's the House and the Senate, the Congress as a whole, are supposed to do that. But this allows the president to do it. Now, the problem that you have with fast track authority is the president's already doing it.
Mm-hmm.
It goes back to the old adage that it's easier to get forgiveness than it is permission.
Right.
And so what's happening is, under the Constitution, the President of the United States is illegally negotiating trade agreements. Now, that's not supposed to happen, but after the fact, they're giving these trade agreement, fast-track authority to the President of the United States after, again, as I said, after the fact. But, in addition to that, what they do in this authority is they tell the Congress, they bind their own hands. Fast track authority is to bind the president, but the practice of fast track authority is the opposite. It really binds the Congress. And this is how it binds it. First of all, it gives away the negotiation aspect of it to the president. But after that, they are not allowed to amend it. It's either an up or down vote when it hits Congress. And it has to be done usually within a 60 to 90 day period, depending on the authority that's passed. And so here you are, you've got hundreds, sometimes thousands of pages like NAFTA was.
Right.
It was 2,000 pages long. It was sort of another one of those things we have to pass it in order to find out what's in it. And what we found in is not good, but we can get that to later. But at any rate, so there's no time for Congress to digest these agreements. They're too big, they're too ponderous. They are too interlocking with other treaties. This is an aspect that a lot of people don't understand, is that we have treaties with these folks, we have agreements with those folks, and likewise all of these countries do as well. Now how do you bind that all together? How do you put a new treaty together that doesn't violate these provisions, and so on and so forth? It is a mess. And so trying to decipher all that and put it together and see what's really in there to decide, do I vote it up or do I vote it down, is very difficult. And by the way, another aspect of it will be, either in the beginning or buried in there somewhere, will be the agreement that we subordinate some part of our government to the United Nations.
Well, that brings up an interesting thought. I was reading something the other day about NAFTA, and there is a court case. Nobody expected any of this to happen, but it's where they're going to get a ruling outside of the U.S. courts in favor of a Canadian firm. And this has to do with the original NAFTA agreement and parts of it that basically ceded the authority to the foreign powers that put the NAFTA agreement together and their decision-making process, rather than our own Supreme Court.
That's true. It supersedes our Supreme Court in any state or federal court. There's no appeal. And we're bound by it. Now, every one of these trade agreements have set up one of those courts. That's the thing that a lot of people don't understand.
Right.
And right now, off the top of my head, I can't give a reference to where your listeners can actually go and look up online all these various international courts that we're beholden to now that supersede the Supreme Court, which is not supposed to happen. Now, since the end of World War II, that has been the thought, and that has been what these internationalists within our country have imbued within that American psyche, is the idea that treaties supersede the Constitution. It's not true. All of our forefathers, whether you're talking about Hamilton or Washington, Jefferson, Madison, they all said that there was no way that the treaties could supersede the Constitution, or you wouldn't have a Constitution. It wouldn't function. But since we joined the UN, the United Nations, that's what they've been trying, the internationalists within the United States have been trying to get the American people to believe. And so what we are seeing is that the practice is that. And every one of the treaties that we've signed, every one of them, either in the beginning or buried somewhere in it, you will find that we have subordinated some part of the United States government, even American society, to the United Nations, even in NAFTA. These NAFTA courts are not unusual. They're in almost all these trade agreements, but you don't recognize that that's what they're talking about until after it's passed and it's implemented.
Do you consider this part of Agenda 21?
Well, Agenda 21 is, it isn't a part of Agenda 21. Agenda 21 is part of the overall plan.
Okay.
And the overall plan is to bind the citizens down, just like Gulliver in Gulliver's Travels. The Lilliputians came and laid all these threads across them. In our case, it's Agenda 21. It's trade agreements. It's NATO. It's any number of different things, until all those threads are put in place that then they can yank them taut, and the American people are powerless. We've lost our independence. And that's what's going on. It's going on subtly. The people that want to do this are scared to death. of the American people. They have to get rid of the Constitution, at least abrogate it, ignore it, amend it, in order to go into this one world government that they want. A lot of people don't understand that there are those that mean to rule us. Now, I know a lot of people say, well, that can't happen here in America. This is America after all. Things like that don't happen here. They happen in Germany and Russia and China and other places, but not here. What they forget is we're made up of people from Germany and Russia and China. And so we're a melting pot of the world. So the thing is that there are those that want to rule us. And the American people don't know how they are going about toward that end. They have to bring down the economy of the government, of the United States. They have to change the government. They have to change the Constitution. They have to do a number of things all at once in order to bring down the society, the economy, and the government of the United States to where we can comfortably merge with the rest of the world.
Okay, I understand exactly where you're going to, and when you take a look at what's gone on over the last 6 years since President Obama has been in office, we've seen the economy take a huge dump, although you hear all of the stories about how it's really come back. It hasn't come back at all. And, I am a student of economics, spent a lot of time on Wall Street. I've seen what's gone on. And the other thing is the immigration policy has changed so dramatically. We've opened the borders up, basically. We're taking 1 million of the H-2B people in here every year, if not more, plus what's coming across our borders. Is this, do you think, part of the plan, and then a constitutional convention being called around the same time?
It all fits. Two things. One thing I would like to point out as a fact that's rather interesting to your remark that the economy is not improving. If your listeners could find it online, and I got it, I don't know if you can access it or not, but just look at electricity use. If you look at the tables of electricity use in the United States, it's plummeted. Mm-hmm. Now, why? We all use electricity and everything else. It's plummeted because industry is not using electricity as they once did.
And a lot of industry has moved overseas.
That. And, but at any rate, the thing is that Lincoln had a very good quote that I like to quote. I give a synopsis because it's too lengthy, but basically he was saying that there was a conspiracy amongst a certain number of individuals, and he named their first names. And he said, when you see these men come together in a certain place at a certain time, all of them carrying boards which link together, and every board in its place, notched out to fit, and it becomes a house, then you know that there was a plan.
Right. That
somebody put it together. Right. Somebody knew what they were doing. And that's what we see, whether it's NAFTA, the trade agreements, the CONCON, Agenda 21, our energy policy, it doesn't matter what. It all is coming towards a head to one thing, and that's the subordination of the United States and the American people to a one world government.
Do you think that a lot of this one world government movement is part and parcel of why they've been trying to get our guns?
Absolutely. There are two things that are necessary to have a totalitarian state when it comes to defense. Number one is the ability of the people to defend themselves. The right to life is not simply being against abortion. The right to life is being able to defend yourself, your family, your home, your neighborhood, that kind of thing. So the citizen must be armed, and we've got to keep in mind too, what did the citizens of the United States do before the United States? They had militias in every town, and those free men with the freedom to keep and bear arms were able to overthrow, secede, if you will, if you want to use that term, from the British government. So they knew that in order for the people to remain free, they had to retain that ability. Now, technology has changed and that sort of thing, and I don't want to get into that aspect of it. But the other thing is, too, that it isn't just simply the Second Amendment. It's whether you can keep your local police local.
Right.
Holding to local citizens instead of the federal government. There is no totalitarian state that does not have a national police force, and you can't have a totalitarian state without a national police force.
Well, isn't that important in the fact that we try to elect constitutional sheriffs?
Exactly. The sheriffs are really the primary authority in any county. Now, there are some exceptions, hither and yon, but they are very few, and that is the coroner may be the ultimate authority in that county because of the way the statutes are set up.
Well, the coroner is the only one who can actually arrest the constitutional sheriff, am I correct? Because I've heard that here.
Well, it may be here, but it's not always the case everywhere. It depends on how it's all, the statutes are all set up. There's there's just under 4,000 counties in the United States, I believe, and I don't remember how many of them are that way. But the sheriff has far more authority. Usually he doesn't realize it.
Right.
And sometimes he's afraid to exercise it against federal authority. But he can if he is willing to. The problem that we had early on in our history is that immediately people wanted to take away local authority. There were a lot of things that were done to change our electoral system, the electoral college immediately, that eliminated the checks and balances within the executive branch. But at the same time, there were initiatives by the states to change the power of the counties, because the counties were far more independent when we first started out. Today, they're almost adjuncts of the state. So gradually over the 2 centuries, we've seen the localized authority being pushed up into larger authorities. Metro government, for instance, is an example where they'll take a metropolitan area and they want to consolidate everything in that area instead of having all, the main hub, let's say Philadelphia, for instance. They want to then incorporate all these other little towns and these other little suburbs and their police departments until ultimately you've got this huge metropolitan government that even goes across county lines in some cases, and that sort of thing. So there's this consolidation of control and authority and power that we have to fight all the time, even in our local communities.
Well, I wanted to go back a little bit further than that. I see what's been happening over the last 10 or 15 years, but I think a lot of this goes back a lot further, even as far back as the 1940s when we changed our education system from a traditional Christian education system into a public education system. And so many people have said over the last 50 years, the progressives have basically taken over the education of our children. And that's how the changes have been taking place slowly but surely. As they say, they don't need guns to take a country over. They just need the minds of the people to adhere to what they are saying and what they're thinking. We see some of that now with Common Core and the way the literature is being placed in the books in the Common Core system.
Well, that's true. However, I could start back in 1820 with the takeover of the schools, but we won't go back that far.
Okay, I'm not that old.
Let's just point out that, and your listeners will have to, find out for their own. But there was a movement within the intelligentsia, a small coterie that said, we're going to take over the publishing houses, we're going to take over the encyclopedias, we're going to take over this and that and the other, so that even if you didn't take over the schools, you controlled what books they had because they were the ones that were printed. And so, to give you an example, by 1900, they had changed the American electorate so much that in the 1912 election, no matter who you voted for, you lost. The 4 candidates were Eugene Debs, the socialist, Teddy Roosevelt, the progressive, which is another word for socialist.
Sure.
You had William Howard Taft, whose father founded Skull and Bones, and he was a member of Skull and Bones. And then you had Wilson, who we got.
Oh, yes, and that was the worst.
And so, as a result of that, in 1914, 15, and 13, in that era, we got the income tax, We eliminated we got the direct election of senators. People had no idea of the problems that meant. In fact, it's interesting, those that want a con-con never want to mention the fact that all we have to do is get rid of the 16th and 17th Amendment and we'll balance the budget.
Right.
But that's another story. We're talking about education right now. So there was this problem all along. Now, you say 1940s, there's always been a leap. And each one of us have, in our lifetime, seen those leaps. But these leaps have been happening for 200 years. Each one built on the previous ignorance. So I know when I went to school I was in high school in the early 1950s.
Right.
And I distinctly remember my government teacher telling me there's no difference between a republic and a democracy. It's just a matter of which one you want to use. Well, now I know the difference. He also said that communism is not a bad system of government, it's just bad people who've tried to implement it.
That's the joke.
Yeah, so, all these kids, okay, yeah, okay. And it's the same way that they teach the Second Amendment. For several years, even in Idaho, back in the 70s, and I don't remember what book it was. I've got the sheet that I photostated, but I wasn't astute enough at the time to say, hey, I've got to jot down what book this came out of. But it was in an Idaho school where they said the second, and by the way, the Bill of Rights was taught as if this was the Bill of Rights. This is the language of the Bill of Rights, and this is the way they said the Second Amendment was. The people have the right to keep and bear arms, but Congress has the right to regulate it.
And that's what's happened in this state, because the state now is regulating guns and have been, forever. It was 1990 before we actually got a concealed carry permit law in here.
And another thing is that in Common Core, but reaching back several years, they've taught the idea that the people have the right to keep and bear arms in a militia.
Correct.
And by the way, many of those individuals who want a constitutional convention want to put that language in the Second Amendment. They aren't all a bunch of conservatives. There are a lot of very hardcore leftists involved in this process. Now, we've been accused, the John Birch Society, of working with people who take money from Soros. And we keep saying, well, Soros, the check got lost in the mail. Could you mail it again?
Soros used to be a client of mine years and years
really?
ago. I didn't trust him then. I still don't trust him, unfortunately.
Well, the thing is that people have to do some homework.
Right.
And they can find a lot of this stuff out online. The only thing I do is I caution people when you use the internet. Be careful, the truth is bad enough. So be careful of your sources. Make sure that they're right. Just don't take one source. Go and look at several to make sure that the quote is accurate, that the facts are accurate, and that sort of thing. Another thing that's been happening lately, and particularly in Agenda 21, was once the John Birch Society got involved, they started erasing the internet of pertinent information.
Oh, I've seen that happen.
Yeah. And it happens far more than people realize it does. One of the things, for instance, with this Constitutional Convention is that they had on the Compact for America, they had a page up there of their brain trusts, and they listed them, organizations and individuals, and there were some very good organizations listed. But then you started to see where they were cooperating with open leftists on that same list. And they were even saying, we're going after the Brookings Institute to come on board. We're going after the Peterson Foundation to come on board. Well, Peterson used to be the president or chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations. So you start to see that coming in there, and then you start to ask questions, oh, wait a minute, what's going on here? How can you have two diametrically opposed individuals working for a constitutional convention, each with something different to come out of as their goal to come out of that convention? It doesn't compute. And so there's something going on. And they say you're fear-mongering. Yeah, we're fearful.
Well, I question the Constitutional Convention, and I question the reason for it, because if we stuck by the original Constitution, we wouldn't have to change anything. We just need to abide by the original rules. But you had John Kasich came out here, governor of Ohio, and spoke to our legislators. That's why I'm glad you're here. We got some legislators coming tonight. And he came in and he says, we really need to have a con-con so that we can get a balanced budget. And in the same breath, he says, and by the way, I'm taking $50 billion from the U.S. government so that I can have Medicaid expansion in my state. And you should do the same thing.
Well, not only that, people forget that Kasich was one of the Republicans that supported Bill Clinton's assault gun ban.
Right.
And one of his closest friends is Leon Panetta. He brags about how much he gets along and works well with those on the other side of the aisle. And, you know, bipartisanship is basically another word for compromise. And they've compromised us into the position we are in right now. There are a lot of solutions to balance the budget that are never spoken.
Stop spending.
Stop spending. Another thing is, like I said, repealing the 16th and 17th Amendments. All sorts of things of that nature. Foreign aid, on and on and on. But the big one is get rid of the unconstitutional agencies that exist.
What about the Fed?
Well, that's got to go too. The thing is that the Fed is a private corporation, but I'm not in favor of it being a government corporation either.
That would be worse.
That would be
But
worse.
it's quasi-government now.
It's quasi-government, but in secret. We don't. There are a lot of things they do with it. We cannot prove. We know it, but we can't prove it. I've had congressmen tell me some of the things they've tried to prove, and they can't get in there deep enough to be able to prove it, but they know it. And so I'm not even sure that we need a bill passed to audit the Fed. Now, I'm not opposed to having a bill. I'm not opposed to sponsoring it and voting for it and supporting it. But I'm not sure that it's absolutely necessary. Either Congress has the ability to oversee the Fed or it doesn't.
Well, we investigate corporations for corruption. Congress has called corporation presidents and gone in and looked at their books. Why, if this is a private corporation,
Exactly.
we should have that ability.
Exactly. Any one of the committees that oversee the Fed, either in the House or the Senate, could call them forward and start looking at the record.
So they must be afraid of something.
Well, the Fed is quite powerful. A lot of people, if they haven't really looked at it beyond the monetary aspects of it, they've done some pretty unsavory things over the last several decades. And it is, after all, the fifth plank of the Communist Manifesto. In other words, there were 10 steps that Karl Marx and Frederick Engels outlined in the Communist Manifesto to bring about a communist state. And the fifth step was a central bank.
Right, control the money.
Control the money.
But everything that we do here at the Gem State Patriot, we always follow the money, and I've found that 99% of the time, when they follow the money, that's the pure root of the problem. Somebody's getting rich and somebody's greedy.
Yep, somebody's paying for it.
And usually it's the taxpayers.
Yes, regrettably.
Don't you find that we have so much more corruption that we find in government nowadays than, let's say, 50 years ago?
I don't know. I do a lot of research. I'm just now putting the finishing touches on a history of the first 100 years of the United States from this angle, this aspect, this conspiracy, if you will, to alter the United States. And the corruption that I've seen in over the years, I can't say that we're any more corrupt today because we're dealing with human nature, and human nature never varies. It's just that people are becoming more aware of it. A lot of people weren't aware of it before because there wasn't any really opposition. There was no organization to what was going on. It was just the layers of strength in the American people and the Constitution that prevented them from going too fast.
Accountability.
Too far. Accountability. But there have been times in our country, we almost lost the United States twice. Once, right after the ratification of the Constitution by foreign agents, that came in and were subverting members of our government. They were having riots on the streets. I'll just give you one. For instance, there were 10,000 people that rioted on the streets of Philadelphia looking for Washington and Adams to hang them. You don't read about that in your history books, but if you do your research, you'll find it's a fact. They were stirred up by foreign agents. The second time was at the conclusion of the Civil War. We literally lost our government to this conspiracy. But there were a number of things that happened, the layers of strength within the Constitution and the American people, and the competition within the body of people that wanted to rule. No, I want to be leader. No, I want to be leader.
Right.
Until they eroded their power as a result of that infighting. But it was very close. It was extremely close that we lost our freedom at the end of the Civil War. And so when you see those sorts of things happening time after time in the last 230 years, yeah, you could say, based on what I see right now, you have this opinion that it's all lost. There's no hope.
I don't feel that way. I mean, personally, I don't feel that way. I think the American people will eventually rise back up and change things. And each election that we go through, nothing happens quickly. It took a long time to get where we are.
That's right.
It's going to take a long time to get back to where we want to be.
And the thing is that the people that want to rule us are scared to death of the American people.
They should be.
Yeah, because who knows what would happen if the American people really started to understand what was going on. There'd be a lot of trials. There would be a lot of consequences. Hopefully, there wouldn't be violence. But there will be consequences for this somewhere down the road. There will be consequences if we lose, obviously. There will also be consequences for a small group of people as a result of the American people waking up.
Do you find that there is a certain apathy amongst the American people? I see it out here in Idaho. I'm an elected official for the Republican Party out here. But I find when I went around to visit with people, they are very unaware of almost all of the issues that are important.
That's true. They're not apathetic, they're ignorant. And I don't mean that they're stupid. It's just a lack of information. That's what ignorance is. And but we have to keep in mind, too, that only 5% actually run the community.
Right.
And so those are the people that you have to influence. During the War for Independence, the American people were split pretty evenly between those that wanted independence, those who were Tories, and those that could have cared less. But the thing was that the historians will agree that just about 3% was all that actually got in the War for Independence. Well, that 3% is 60% of that 5%. And so all you have to do is get the majority of that 5% in your community, in your state, and then you can make things happen. The problem that I see relative to that in the Congress, and a lot of people don't know this, and I ask everybody to go online and prove it to themselves. Look up social Democrats in Congress. You will find that 70 members of the United States Congress belong to the Socialist Internationale. Now, 70 in the Congress of the United States is a huge figure.
Right, it is.
Now, they don't campaign as socialists, but I don't think that you will find too many surprises in the names that are listed. But at any rate, they admit that they're part of this organization that wants to bring about a one-world government under socialism.
Well, nothing surprises me anymore. I mean, we have people who are Democrats that want to win office here in Idaho, so they can't run as Democrats, so they run as Republicans. And we wind up with these moderate liberal Republicans in office, and everybody says it's the reddest of the red states, when really it's one of the bluest of the red states. I'd like to just get one more question for you. Presidential election coming up in 2016.
Yes.
Where do you see this going? I mean, we have some interesting contenders, Scott Walker, Dr. Carson, Jeb Bush, and several others, on the outskirts. I don't see any true conservatives aside from Walker in there. Where do you see this going?
Well, quite honestly, first of all, let me say that the John Birch Society never gets involved in politics.
Right.
We don't endorse anybody, support anybody. that sort of thing.
I'm looking for your opinion.
My opinion is Jefferson's opinion. Bind their hands down with the chains of the Constitution. A pox on all of them. No, there are some good people running, absolutely, but they're not 100%. None of them.
None of them are.
No. And I have not yet found a Republican candidate that is opposed to the free trade partnerships. Not one.
And that's not a good thing.
That's not a good thing.
You know, I know you do a lot of teaching in the John Birch Society. You brought your people up to speed on a lot of things that are happening. If somebody wants to know more about the John Birch Society, where would they go to look?
JBS, John Birch Society, jbs.org. And we have a very robust website. You can go to the issues page and find out about 25 different issues, a lot of information on them. We have our magazine website. In fact, you can sign up for daily articles. We post, about 10 fresh articles a day. We write. We don't post them from other places. We write these articles. And it keeps people abreast of current things, history, how to get organized in your community, all sorts of things. And you can spend months exploring the site and never trip over the same thing.
Well, that's a good thing. I want to thank you very much, Art,
My
for being
pleasure.
with us today. And I hope you come back and visit us soon again.
I look forward to it. By the way, my daughter does live in the state, so.
That's wonderful. So we will see you again.
Yes.
All right. You have a good trip back and enjoy your meeting tonight.
Thank you very much.
Have a good day.